Hi, I'm Sarah Nadi from the University of Alberta, and in this video I'll talk to you about how to prepare a grad school application and how to contact potential supervisors. So before I get started, let me give you a bit of background about where I work and what I do. So I'm currently an assistant professor in the Department of Computing Science at the University of Alberta, where I lead the software maintenance and reuse lab, and we do research including mining software repositories to help developers select and use software libraries and to improve collaborative software development. So in terms of my education, my bachelor degree was from the American University in Cairo. So that gives me a bit of the international student perspectives. I applied from there to come to Canada as a graduate student. I did my graduate degrees at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And I also worked a bit as a postdoc for around 2 years in TU Darmstadt in Germany. So I got to see a little bit about the European system as well. And that brings me to a couple of context and disclaimers I want to make before we jump into the talk, just to give you a bit of context about what to expect here. So in this talk, I'm assuming that you've already decided on pursuing graduate studies, so I'm not going to try to convince you that that's a good thing to do. I already assume that you've chosen a research area, so I'm not going to discuss how to find a good supervisor or how to select your research area. So for example, you've decided I want to do software testing or I want to do mining software repositories. And I will put the disclaimer out there that I do have a mostly North American and particularly Canadian perspective on things. So for example, there are subtle differences between admission systems across countries. So some schools, you get admitted to a program without having a committed supervisor, and then you spend time finding a supervisor. Other programs, you need to have a committed supervisor that says, hey, I'm going to fund this student. So depending on the system, when you might need to contact a supervisor, when you might need to prepare certain types of material might differ. But at the end of the day, regardless of what point in time you try to contact that supervisor, what point in time you try to figure out what directions you want and how to write a research statement, most of the advice in this talk will generalize, and I will touch upon maybe differences in the systems where applicable in this talk. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about 4 things: how to prepare your application material, how to email your potential supervisor, and how to do well on the interview if you have one, and just kind of general tips about how to prepare a strong application. So let's start with your application. So of course there's normal things like your transcripts and things that go in there. But before you start doing all of that, what I advise you to do is check the deadline. I know this sounds very obvious, but this is where the different systems come into play. So for example, most North American universities have a fall-only admissions, and the deadline for that is usually the December or January that precedes that, September or August, depending on which when your fall term starts. On the other hand, there are some Canadian universities, for example, that have multiple application deadlines. So you can get in Waterloo, for example, you can get admitted in the fall, spring, or winter. So basically, go check your application deadlines. The worst thing you can do is email a supervisor asking them to get admitted in the fall when the deadline has passed 2 months ago. So once you figure out the deadlines, once you figure out the system, if you're, for example, in Europe and basically you're applying directly to a professor, there's still going to be a deadline. It might not be the university deadline, but they'll still have a deadline by which they want applications. So then the next thing that's important, that you're going to have your CV in there. Now, there's usual things like your education or your degree, but there's also interesting things that we'd like to see there. So for example, do you have any teaching experience? Have you been a TA for any course? You don't necessarily have to have that, but if you have it, that's something you want to put in your CV. What are particular projects that you are proud of? So for example, you don't need to put every single course project you've ever worked on, but you want to make sure that if there is a particularly interesting senior project, or even better, a research project that you've worked on, that you put that description there. So you also want to mention your technical skills, like which programming languages you know, tools you've worked with, and maybe there's also some soft skills. If you're particularly good at something like storytelling, or you're good at presentations, ideally with some kind of something to showcase. If you have a link for that or something like that, that would be useful. And then any awards that you've had, so any scholarships or awards at the undergraduate level, if you've already done a master's at the graduate level, you want to put in there. You also want to mention any extracurricular activities you have. At the end of the day, we're hiring a person, so it's nice to hire a well-rounded person who has different interests and hobbies. And you actually also never know when some of those skills might come in handy. For example, if you're into theater, filmmaking, or video editing, then this can come in handy when you need to prepare a video describing your research, for example, or prepare a talk like this in the current times. So once you have your CV done, then you want to actually prepare your research statement. And that's probably one of the things that's new to most people applying for graduate school. You've probably never written a research statement or a statement of purpose. It's called different things in different universities. But the idea is that this tells me why you want to do a PhD or why you want to do a master's and what you're good at or what your interests are, what background you have. Now, a lot of the statements I read start with things like I've been dreaming about doing computer science since I was a kid. And while that's kind of interesting to know, it doesn't really set you apart from everybody else. You want to make sure that it's really you. It's not like pre-template kind of things that you want to put in there that you want to show that you're really passionate about computer science. Ideally, what you want to put there is research projects you're interested in. So which directions do you want to do? Are you interested in software testing? Are you interested in software maintenance? Are you interested in data analytics? So for example, mining software repositories, and give maybe a particular example of why you're interested in that. Maybe you can relate to experiences you've had. Maybe you've worked as a software developer or even in your course projects, and you found that developers don't write tests as often, and that kind of came and bit you back and the quality of your project wasn't great. And so you want to figure out ways how to improve software testing. So what I just said, I didn't say how I'm going to improve it because I don't expect anybody who's fresh out of undergrad or maybe even with a master's degree to know exactly what they're going to do for their PhD thesis. But we'd like to see that you have some idea of what you want to do. Now, once I know what you want to do, I want to know how your background is relevant. So, for example, you could say the story that you've worked on these projects, that you've used these testing tools. Maybe you've even tried one or two test generation tools and found that the generated tests don't work that well, and so you want to improve that. Or maybe you've already worked on a research project. It could be on a completely different topic, but you understand how to read papers, how to write the related work section, or even how to just approach a problem that you don't know anything about and how to figure things out. So basically, you want to tell me how the skills that you've gained or things that you already know can contribute to that project. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you already know how to solve this project or how to solve this problem or how to complete your PhD, because, I mean, if you do, why are you here? Why are you still starting to join a PhD program? But it just gives the supervisor some confidence that you've thought about this, that you have something that they can relate to. And then kind of you can touch upon your career goals and what motivates you to do a PhD or join graduate studies. What do you want to do? What moves you in life? What drives you in life? It's always nice to get a personal touch, but again, it should be really something that you believe in, that sets you apart. And the statement of purpose is important. I personally read through it, especially for PhD candidates. Maybe for master's students, it's less important because we don't have as much expectations that you've done research. Of course, if you do, that already sets you apart. But for a PhD student, I think it's really important to try to put some thought into your statement of purpose or your research statement. And it's usually around 1 or 2 pages, so don't go overboard. 1 page is typically what most universities have a cutoff at, but you should check what the requirements of the university you're applying to is. Okay, so once you have your CV, your research statement, you've checked the deadlines, now comes a very important part of your application, and that's your reference letters. Now, this is an interesting aspect because you actually don't have a lot of control over what gets written in the letter. So you don't actually see the letter. Somebody can say, okay, what can I do? Like I ask for a letter, they submit the letter, and I hope things work out. But you can actually at least make sure that the person you choose is going to write a good letter for you. So first of all, choose somebody that knows you well. So if you're going to go back to a professor that taught you a course 3 years ago, where you've never interacted with the professor, they've never even talked to you outside of maybe raising your hand once in class, then they're probably not going to have much to say about you beyond looking up your grades and saying they got an A in the class. Which is already great that you got an A in the class, but it doesn't tell me anything specific. A good reference letter provides more specific information, like maybe you've done particularly well in assignments, there was a challenging assignment, and you had an interesting solution for it. Or you proposed this interesting project for your senior course and they actually supervised that project and got to know how you work. Your teammates said good things about you. So the more specific it can be, the better. So choose professors that you actually have some personal relationship with. Maybe you've went to their office hours, you've talked to them during class. The best case scenario is you've actually directly worked with them, even outside the classroom setting. So for example, maybe you've been a teaching assistant with them, maybe you've joined their lab as a summer research student. So the more they can write about you, the better your letter will be. And the more you are, that sets you apart from kind of the rest of the crowd. Another thing that's important is to give them enough time. So if you're going to ask somebody for a letter and tell them the deadline is in a week, that already kind of pisses them off. You want to give them enough time because a good letter really takes time to write. So they want to think about what they're going to say. They want to make sure they draft it, read through it, and write a strong letter for you. So I'd say at least a month. The more heads up you give them, the better. And ideally even give them your application material. So give them your CV, give them your statement of purpose. The more material you can supply, the more things they can say, and the better the letter will be. Okay, so now you've put all your application material together and now you're ready to submit. You've either submitted or you're just about to submit, and you want to contact some potential supervisors in the universities you're interested in applying to. So one of the most important steps before drafting the email is to check the supervisor's webpage. This sounds very intuitive. Why wouldn't I check it? But you wouldn't believe the amount of mass emails we get from students, not understanding how the system works, not understanding that nobody will read those mass emails, that you want to make sure that it's a personalized email to the supervisor. So the more you narrow it down to people you're actually interested in working with, and that there's some genuine common overlap between those interests, the more likely you're going to get a response. And the webpage, the supervisor's webpage, already gives you a lot of hints about what these common interests could be, and even provides specific instructions of what you should do. So I'm going to use my webpage as an example. Of course, the layout might differ. People will have different instructions, but just to tell you that there are instructions in there that you should go and read first before contacting any potential supervisor. So if you see here on my main webpage, I have this big red box that if you're a student and want to contact me, this is what you should do. If you go to that red box and click on it, then you will see a specific page on instructions on what I expect from students, what kind of things I want them to do. And at the end, I even have this phrase that tells them, if you want to contact me, put Winterfell in the email so that I know you've read this email. And I'm not the only one who does that. A lot of professors you'll see will have some catchphrase on their website. It just makes sure that you've went through the instructions and that you've actually read it. And that way they know that you've put in the effort and they can reciprocate that and put in the effort of reading your email, replying to you, interviewing you, and so on. So once you've checked the supervisor's email and now you're the supervisor's website, and now you're about to write that email, you want to create a meaningful customized email. So something that is specifically to that professor. I mean, some of your background, obviously, it's not going to change. So maybe I'm contacting like 5 different professors and there's a part of my email that's common, but when I say my research overlaps, my research interest overlaps with yours, I need to be specific, right? So that's what the customization for that specific professor comes in. You want to prioritize specifics over being generic. So maybe you have a lot of different projects you've worked on. Maybe you have an amazing CV, but you want to be specific into as to what relates to that professor. So give concrete examples of projects you've worked on, very briefly, or topics that you know, or things like that. So specifics are better than just kind of giving a broad overview of everything that you've done. And be explicit about what you're asking for. So are you asking for fall admissions? Are you asking for maybe admissions in a year? Are you asking them for a research position that's over the summer? So just getting an email from an interested student is not enough for me to differentiate if this is for a master's application, a PhD application, and what year. So just be specific in what you're asking. Don't leave any room for doubt or for things getting misunderstood. And then keep it concise. The more you can put the right information in a shorter email, the higher chance somebody goes through it and actually replies. So to make this a bit more concrete, I'm going to give you 2 examples of emails and kind of go through them to say what was good or what was bad about these emails. Let's start with the first one. So this email starts with "Respected Professor," which sounds great, right? But actually, this doesn't tell me if the student actually knows or cares what my name is, or if this is just a generic email that they send to every single person on our faculty mailing list. They then go on to tell me how many research publications they have, and that they're in international conferences, which sounds impressive, but I'm actually not sure what the topic of these papers are or what the venues are. So are these really relevant to my research, or are these in a completely different field which I have no expertise about? And then they mentioned that they found that our research interests overlap, but for me, I don't actually know, do they? I don't know what their research area is so that I can really judge that. So basically, this email gave me no information about the student, and probably I will not reply to it. So if you feel frustrated that you maybe sent an email and never got a reply, maybe go back and check some of these things. Was your email very generic that it sounded that you didn't really put in the effort to look into the supervisor's specific profile? Go back and try to revisit some of those things, and maybe you would have better luck getting a reply. Now let's look at a good email. So the first thing they mention here is Winterfell. So it means they've actually read the instructions on my website that I just showed you. They actually address me. So means that they personally went through my page, know who I am, know my name. They say they graduated with a master's in software engineering. So okay, at least in a broad sense, the research area matches. So that's good. And they actually mentioned that they went through one of my recent publications. Which means that they've actually followed the instructions on my website and went through the effort of reading one of my recent work to see what I'm currently working on. They even go further and tell me some of the things that can be improved in the paper. And this is great. You might think that this would offend a supervisor if you start saying things that they can improve in their paper. But actually, to the contrary, if I find a student that can think about something critically and find how it can be improved, that's great. That's how research happens. I mean, don't go and tell somebody their paper sucks, but it's completely okay, in fact, actually encouraged to say, I think this work can be extended in the following ways, or I think you've missed this important point that would make the paper stronger. These are all things that show that you've actually went through the work and thought about it and have interesting things to say. Finally, they clearly explain the research directions they are interested in, even if it's in a broad sense, but I think that email actually went into more detail. They provide their different education and background and what they're currently doing. And finally, they are explicit as to what this email is for, that they're interested in a PhD position. I would go even further and say, let's put in a start date. Which start date are you interested in? And they also include necessary documents and websites that I can check for more information. So that's a great email. It's actually an email that I replied to, interviewed the student. So this is an example of an email that can at least attract the potential supervisor's attention and make them reply to you and take it from there. So what I can really summarize about this whole thing is do your homework. And this is not me alone. Before or while preparing this talk, I posted on Twitter asking if there are things people want me to cover, to touch upon. And already 3 of the faculty members that replied to this thread were saying, please customize things, please do your homework. There was even a suggestion that, try a tool that this research group produces, maybe even contribute to it. And that's a great suggestion. The moral of the story is do your homework, show you care, and definitely you will get feedback. Even if the fit isn't right, or even if this professor doesn't have funding, is not hiring right now, the fact that you've put in the effort will make them want to reply back to you and even tell you that, there's no opportunity right now, but it really makes a difference. Okay, so now you've written to this professor and they say, okay, they're interested to work with you. What usually happens next, and this completely differs, it's completely up to the professor, because not every place, or at least none of the places I know of, actually have a formal interview process for all their applicants. So this is usually the professor's effort trying to get to know the students, trying to interview the potential PhD candidates. But everybody I've talked to does this in one way or another, because nobody wants to hire somebody they've never spoken to. Now, in addition to the actual interview, usually there's some way they want to evaluate you. This can be giving you a bunch of tasks to do. And one of the typical tasks could be a reading task. So, hey, here's a paper, go read it, summarize it, write a review about it, tell me what can be improved. One of the following kind of different formats. And usually it would be one of their own research papers, but it could be any research paper. And what they're really trying to get out of this, or at least what I try to get out of this, is can the student write clearly? Can they express themselves in writing, and can they write critically about something or not, and actually write also concisely about it? Can they think about a problem and try to find improvements for it, try to find what's wrong, and ideally go beyond section X wasn't clear, or the writing could be improved. So go beyond the cosmetics of the paper and actually focus on maybe the methods used weren't right, or they've missed this very important point, or it's not clear if this is really a problem in practice or not because X, Y, Z. So some really critical thinking about the paper. And then are they able to think of new directions? Usually I ask students, what would you extend about this paper? Or if you were to continue this line of work, what would you do? And this forces you to think, okay, what can I extend? What's there to be improved? And this is very important analytical ability that this task kind of assesses. And what I usually do, and I think this is actually the more common thing, is give some kind of coding task. And what I give is actually not a hard coding task. It's a simple task, but what I'm trying to get out of it is, well, I guess, can they code? Can you write code at all? Can you program at all? At one point in your research, you're probably going to write some kind of program to analyze something, to mine data, to run experiments. So you need to have some basic skills here, and this kind of assesses that. Another thing I look for is kind of how you document this piece of code. Will you clearly describe how to run it, provide clear instructions, have a nice README file? So more of the kind of software development process about it. So I look, do you have actually multiple Git commits, or is this like an upload at the end of the day kind of thing? So these small kind of indications of how you develop your software. But most importantly, what I'm really looking for is if you have a problem that you know nothing about, or maybe you've never written this piece of this type of software before, can you go and figure it out? And that kind of how you figure it out basically tells me how you approach a problem that you are not familiar with. And these are all great skills that you want to have, and these kind of tasks, assess them. Again, it's not really the task per se, it's how you approach it that's really being assessed here. Now, usually at the end or at the beginning, I've seen people do it in different ways. Some people have a Skype interview first and then give tasks if they like the person. Some people give the tasks first as a filtering step and then interview the student. This can happen in multiple ways. Some of these steps might not happen at all, but at one point you're probably going to talk to this potential supervisor. And this is really important because at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out is, as a student, do I like this professor? And the professor is trying to figure out as a supervisor, can I actually mentor the student? Can I work with them? Can I see them every day or not? So what the supervisor is trying to figure out is they want to get to know you, they want to understand your background, they want to understand what your research interests are, and they probably, very importantly, want to assess your communication skills. Now, depending on if you're applying for a master's or PhD, I personally actually ask PhD applicants to prepare a presentation of one of their research projects. In Canada, most likely PhD students already have a master's, so I actually ask them to present their master's thesis work. So that's part of me trying to assess their communication skills. For a student, this is not only you being put under the spotlight, this is a great opportunity for you to figure out, is this really the right group for you? Is this really the right supervisor for you? They may be a big name, they may have a lot of research funding, but maybe you just don't click with them. So at the end of the day, you're going to spend probably 4 or 6 years with this person if you're doing a PhD, and you want to make sure that you like the person. So take this as an opportunity for you as well. So as a student, you want to get to know them. You want to decide if you like their research area. So you've done your homework, you've read their website, but maybe you want to also hear what they have to say about it. Sometimes websites aren't up to date, so maybe they have new projects that they're excited about and you want to hear about them. You want to understand how their group functions. So actually a very good question to ask is, how often do you meet with your students? What's the group structure like? How do you have frequent meetings? Do you have any social events? So this is good to kind of understand the group dynamics. And you want to understand their supervision style. Are they more of a hands-on supervisor? Do they usually just meet with you once a month and have somebody else working with you? So you really need to kind of understand what's there. And one of the pitfalls I've seen when students are being interviewed is they try to think of, or they give their answers based on what they think the supervisor wants to hear. And I think that's not the right approach. So if I ask a student what their research interests are, I really want to listen to what they think. I don't want them to give me keywords off my website. I know what's on my website. So this is not flattering. I think you really want to show your true self, because at the end of the day, this is going to be a long-term relationship, and you want to make sure that you are both on equal understanding of what you're each interested in. So now that you've kind of got an idea of how to contact a supervisor, how to prepare your application, what to expect in an interview, I want to just end with some general tips of how to make your application stronger and maybe additional resources that you can use. So a really, really strong application, and this is advice that's applicable, especially if you're maybe in your 3rd year of undergrad or 4th year, basically not end of 4th year, beginning of 4th year. Basically, you still have some time to actually change things. So the best thing you could do is actually try to join a professor's lab as a summer student. Most, depending on kind of which institution you are, if you're in a research institution, most professors hire summer students, undergraduate students as summer research assistants over the summer break, and you can work on a research project, and that's a great way for you to learn how research works, get a good reference letter, and maybe also explore kind of different topics. If your university doesn't offer such a program, now, depending on which country you're in, there might be other programs that are out there that you can make use of. So I know in the US, there's a program, I think it's the REU, which I have to look up what it stands for, and maybe I'll put a link in the video. In Canada, we have also the NSERC USRA, Undergraduate Student Research Awards, and you can actually apply to this for a different university, but you must have contacted that supervisor ahead of time, and they agreed that you can apply with them to get that award and take it up at their university. So I guess my point is try to look at the resources you have within your university. If you do not have such resources, look beyond. Don't be shy to contact some other professor in a different university, or even maybe you can contribute to open source software. So it doesn't have to be a research project. You can find open source software that requires some tasks to do, maybe certain contributions, and work on that, have pull requests, something that shows I go above and beyond and I kind of have interest in really learning more. And this makes your application stand out. You can work as a teaching assistant. So that's also a great opportunity, and that's usually throughout the year, depending on kind of how your semesters work. Undergraduate research assistants are actually great because you maybe just recently took the course, you know the material, so professors are actually always looking for undergraduate research assistants. Now you'll have to check at your university if there's like funded positions for this, or if this is more on a volunteer basis, but this is something worth talking about with faculty members, you know. You can even just go and take online courses. Maybe if you're interested in a specific area and you want to learn more about it. But all these things just show that you are taking initiatives and they make your application stronger. Now, just some advice of how you can get to know what's out there. So I would highly recommend, at least in the software engineering community, we have a lot of researchers that are active on Twitter that kind of tweet about positions they have, tweet about the research topics they're working on. You can engage in conversations with them. And I think if you're part of the mentoring workshop this year, I think there's a talk about actually how to widen your horizon and engage in social media for research. Go to your existing mentors and professors, talk to them, get their advice, especially if you're preparing application material. You can have them take a look at it, get advice about maybe professors you're interviewing with, but basically don't be shy to go out and get advice. Most professors would be happy to talk to you about grad school and look at your applications. And actually, you can, even if you don't want to talk to your professors, maybe find students you know who are already in grad school and who you can ask for a sample application or even get their feedback, or just listen to what they have to say about a particular supervisor. One of the best things is to actually try to contact the supervisor students. Usually interview with the supervisor first and then ask them if they mind putting you in touch with their students. If they do, that's, in my opinion, there's something going on. Why wouldn't they want you to talk to their students? But usually you can get real feedback from the students, kind of figure out what the supervision style is and so on. Obviously, be careful. Nobody's going to tell somebody they don't know the bad things, but they can at least tell you the facts of how often they meet and things like that. So that's all I have to say today. If you want to follow up, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm also going to be part of the mentoring session for the ICSE mentoring workshop. There's 2 sessions, July 2nd and July 3rd. So come and join us, ask your questions, and I'd be happy to hear from you.